if I stay in this job, I can see myself here in 20 years. And I can actually see it going by pretty fast. It would have been financially, I wouldn't have a worry in the world. Status wise, people would be like, dude, damn, you got a good job. But that feeling of meh, like to the thought of that lasting for one more year, let alone 20 years, I was like, that's my greatest fear, actually. And so people always ask me, they're like, you did something so risky. And I say, I actually think that the bigger risk would have been staying.
Right.
And let's unpack that statement of risk. So this goes to your second question, the second part of your question, the risk. What is the risk? Okay, so I have a high income, and first of all, I was lucky, and I'm touching wood, I had some savings. That pot of savings is much lower now, but but I had them. And so, take my numbers-oriented brain, create a budget, figure out roughly how much you spend each month, and see how long that sliver of your savings that you're willing to lose, like go to zero, how long that lasts you. And it's not scientific, but I estimated that period, it felt kind of in the 1.5 to 3 year range. So that was one thing. And then the second thing, which was like much more basic, is I don't think I'll sound arrogant saying it's like, but if I went to become an entrepreneur and I failed, and I know most fail, right? I'm a numbers guy. 99% of startups fail. I'm pretty sure I could go back and get a job in the financial services industry. It might not be this exact job that I had before. And maybe it'd be like not as prestigious or, slightly worse quality of life, whatever. But I'm pretty sure I could get a job. And so then, again, you think of the risk, so you risk that portion of savings that you're comfortable risking. You can get a job. It might not be like the exact same job you had, but you could definitely get a job, or 20 more years of meh. Like the risk calculus was kind of a no-brainer at that point.
This is episode 19 of the Ownstream podcast featuring Kay High. Okay, everyone. Welcome to the Ownstream podcast. This is Stephen Shelley.
This is Teresa Scoba.
And welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. We're delighted that you are tuning in. This week's guest is Kay High. And Kay is based in Brooklyn. And we, of course, lived in New York City for a long time. And so we immediately felt like, wow, Kay's the kind of guy we would really want to connect with in person. But now he's in Brooklyn and we're here in Southern California. But I guess we stumbled across Kay, and it may have been somebody tweeted it or a social media post of some sort. An article appeared on CNN.com within their money section. I don't know. Oh, I guess he mentioned it. It's at the very end of the year. It was right around the time people were thinking about, New Year's resolutions, beginning of a new year, budget and whatnot. So that talks a lot in there about how he's sort of the Oprah for millennials. That's the title of the article. Okay, so that's what they said. But when I read this article, I thought, wow, this guy is really he's the story. Like his story is the story. We're seeing this story everywhere. And the
Ownstream story.
The Ownstream story, yeah. Maybe I'll let you talk about that. But where this guy was doing it, having left behind a kind of a big time job on Wall Street. Like I don't know how much money he was making, but I know it was considerable, and his stock was rising, no pun intended. So anyway, but yes, we saw in his story the story, and it was immediately interesting.
Yeah, I mean the Ownstream story being, he was on a very mainstream path. Ivy League educated. Became an investment banker on Wall Street. And he talks in his TED Talk about, how he kept getting more money and more promotions, and how he was like rising on the ladder, as one does. And that his happiness would sort of go up marginally for that moment, and then it would go nowhere. And that he was feeling in his life, as in the intro quote, kind of meh about everything, that he just like didn't feel happy, didn't feel fulfilled. And, you know, that being the Ownstream story, you know, that mainstream path, there was an awakening moment sort of, you know, I could be living a better life than this. I could be living a more fulfilled, more joyful, more meaningful life. And he decided to make the big change, you know, to go. And he, you know, not without fear, not without, you know, he had fear that, you know, the money at some point would run out, right? But he talks really beautifully on this episode about how he, you know, he left that because what do you really have to risk? You know, if you're unhappy in your life and you've got this life and you want to live it, like, isn't it more of the risk to stay? And so he left, and he just was, at the time, I think, you know, he had started this newsletter that was just in, you know, what was interesting to him. You know, you've heard this, if you've been listening to our podcast, other guests have had a similar, you know, have had similar experiences. Jody Ettenberg, Leo Babauta, where, you know, just kind of start writing about what you're passionate about, and very organically, it was taking off. People were responding to it. It was resonating. And he felt from, you know, the lack point of view of his job, this kind of current of abundance take over as he was writing and as people were responding to that. And he's been, you know, following that excitement, so to speak, and doing a lot of what he calls uncomfortable introspection since leaving his job, peeling away the layers, the fears and the ways of being that he, you know, used to keep himself safe since then, so that he can live a more free and abundant life.
And so you have like this mainstream path that reaches an inflection point due to pain, and then a hard turn. And in Kay's case, he had people looking at him like he was crazy. Like, you're walking away from a lucrative career that's only going to get more lucrative. There's more money, there's more status. And he walked away from that, which took a lot of courage, and then started just kind of following his excitement, following what interested him, as Teresa said. And now he has this business that, if you looked at it with the kind of traditional, quote unquote, entrepreneurial mind, you might wonder, like, how does this work? How does he do this? And yet, because he's committed to following what excites him, following what he likes doing, following his desires, there's this kind of amazing current that he's putting out into the world that is returned to him. And at a certain point in this conversation, I asked him, well, so what is the business? And he sort of describes it, and it's really just all organically flowed from that initial impulse to walk away from what he didn't like and walk towards what he does. And from there is this magical, wonderful painting, if you will, emerged of him offering people value and it returning to him in all these wonderful ways. What comes to mind right now is that moment, and we'll save this nugget for you, but at a certain point, like, I think there was some financial concerns, and he asked for donations on his blog, and donations came in to the tune of a pretty significant number. So that might interest you. But I think the last thing I will say is the authenticity with which he writes and talks, the candor, is a real lesson for me, at least, as a writer and a blogger. And I know that Leo Babauta as well kind of really signifies this in his writing too, where you really just kind of lay open, you know, you bare yourself in a way, and it really connects to people. People really start to seek you out, seek your counsel, to want to learn from you, to want to visit your blog again. That kind of connection made through writing is so important. So if you're a writer or a blogger or what have you, that's something to keep in mind. Like, lay open your struggles, put it out there. That's what reaches people. Exactly. And it belies our thinking that I have nothing to offer sometimes. Like when we want to change so desperately what we're doing in a very well-worn career path, or, you know, we're down a certain road, like, what do I have to offer others? And this magic of just writing about your
your pain, your story, your journey. And he talks about how it just landed with people, and I think that we're able to offer the gift of our experience to others can sometimes just grow a life of its own.
So that is that. You're going to love this. This is very inspiring, very surprising. Kay is extremely eloquent and offers himself very generously through the course of this conversation. One last thing we'd love to ask is if you're enjoying our podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. You probably know how to do that, but you navigate over to the Ownstream podcast page. There's a tab which says ratings and reviews. You click that. You click 5 stars, we would hope, and maybe write us a nice little comment. Having more reviews helps us just gain visibility and exposure. And looking at the numbers on the back end, we can really see things are taking off. We had an episode recently that is now over 12,000 downloads and counting, which is a lot for a new podcast. We haven't even reached 20 episodes yet. So we know things are really gaining speed and momentum, and we love that. We'd love to see that show up on the reviews. It will help us, again, gain visibility. So if you would consider doing that, we'd be very grateful. Okay, we will be back afterwards to wrap up after this conversation. Do enjoy this truly wonderful chat with Kay High.
So, Kay, welcome to the podcast. We're so happy that you're joining us, and I was trying to remember before how Stephen came across you, but Ownstream's all about getting off the mainstream path and living a more free and fulfilled life. And when we were doing some reading, and I guess we came across your story. I think
somebody shared an article that appeared on CNN.com about you, and
that's probably the one.
Yeah. This was, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, 6
December 30th.
Okay. Yeah. So somebody shared it, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And then, of course, the content of the article speaks right to our theme and our subject matter, and it was very exciting. So anyway, that's kind of how we were at least introduced to you. Then I subscribe to Rad Reads and get that, I guess, every week, and I'm always so interested to see what you'll share. And anyway, it's sort of that's kind of how this has turned into a conversation, is that access point. And of course, there's numerous things out there about you, which we'll link to in all of our show notes. But anyway, that's kind of how we became familiar with you, and so we're super jazzed to talk to you because you're stepping out of the mainstream in New York City.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, it's technically good. Brooklyn.
Technically,
yeah.
That's Well, we, so on this podcast, we like to talk to people about how they're doing that, so that we think our listeners really are, some people who are in that process or have done that, or maybe feeling a lot of pain in their more mainstream lives. And so talk to us a little bit, for those who haven't read the article or your other materials, talk to us a little bit about what was going on for you. Was it 2015? What your life was like? You were, kind of a rising star investment banker type, right? Maybe you could tell us what it was like. And then, what caused you to make some changes?
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me on the podcast. It's really an honor, and I love sharing the story. My life has turned into sharing this story, and so it was 2015. I was 35 years old, and I had a 1-year-old. But it had been brewing for a couple of years, and for brief context, I always like to start with my childhood because the story really kind of anchors there. And as a child growing up in New York, I was kind of shy, skinny, not cool, played fantasy games, girls said that I was like the nicest guy. Why would you ever want to date him? You would ruin the friendship.
Right.
It's like the worst place to be as a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
And so I say that because the one thing that I did have was I was smart, not even super book smart, but I was really good at kind of figuring out how systems worked. And by systems, I mean like how to get a job or how to do well in school. Like I view them as a variety of pieces of information and behaviors you have to put together. And I just had a knack for figuring that out. And as I got older, I went to college, and then worked on Wall Street. That kind of special skill of figuring things out really became a competitive advantage. I was really quick at learning things. I think that I could kind of spot trends before others. I had that kind of child of first generation immigrants kind of relentless work ethic and capacity for suffering. I would brag about like being able to, like, I was like, put me on the middle seat for an airplane for 12 hours. Like, I don't care.
That's great.
And I kind of wore it as a badge of honor because that skill or that group of skills helped me really fire up the achievement ladder. And it kind of papered up some of these kind of deeper seated insecurities that I had felt growing up. And so fast forward to kind of my 30s, I'm having a very rapid rise on Wall Street. I'm being recognized through promotions. I'm getting a really big paycheck, but I just felt 3 letters, meh, M-E-H. I was just kind of like a walking, like, meh. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't happy. I was married at the time and had a great relationship with my wife. We were going to have a kid, but it was just like, something's missing here. And what I first thought was that I wasn't being challenged enough, right? It's like I'm good at solving problems, and the current slate of problems that have been thrown at me are not challenging enough. So if I just need to find a harder problem and challenge. And so I initially thought that becoming an entrepreneur would like solve that. I really viewed it as an intellectual yearning. And so I started to think about that. But at the same time, this kind of like, I've always been extremely curious. I think that's part of what helped me kind of have these like group of skills. That was one of the secret skills. And I just started, now they're called side hustles, but, in 2008, Facebook didn't even exist. They were called like hobbies. And I just started these small hobbies. I started kind of this email newsletter just for fun, just to kind of help my friends like find interesting content. I would organize events. I really enjoyed bringing people together. I would do a tiny bit of angel investing, but what I really liked about angel investing was developing a rapport with these young, founders that were usually 5 to 10 years younger than me. So it was more the mentorship element than the investing element of it. And these little things, I would do them before work. I do them on the weekends. I do them at night. And, they were 5% of my time, but they were 95% of my happiness and my personal fulfillment. And I finally kind of got the courage to say, you know what, there is a way that those things can also be the thing that, provide my living. Like imagine if it was 100% of my time. And so that really was like the original impetus to take the plunge.
And I want to highlight something you said. Your daughter was a year old at that point. Was she not? So you're
correct.
You have a job. It sounds like a lucrative job on Wall Street, and a 1-year-old. And you decided to make a decision to leave that job. And so I just identify, I guess, number one is that, there is this this pressure, if you will, from the outside, from many different directions to, okay, now you've got a kid, you've got to really pony up and show up maybe 10 more hours a week for the job. So I just think it's very interesting that you veered away from, say, that standard path at a point when the voices for that path, advocating for that path, are probably louder than before. So I'd love for you to unpack that decision, that moment, that choice to make these changes.
Yeah. So about that, I do want to bring up my daughter because it is a very important part. I mean, obviously of my life, the most important, but it's an important part of the story because having a child, you're right. Like people are like, and my wife is an artist, so she works, but she's not a meaningful income generator, nor has healthcare. Right. So that's just another thing to think about. But having a child made me realize, and you guys are starting to experience this too, it's like the passage of time becomes crystal clear. Yeah. Right? It's like, what's you said you had a daughter or
daughter also.
Daughter.
She's
one. Just a year, a week ago.
What's her name?
Sophia.
So Sophia, when she was 1 month old and she was 2 months old, it's like a completely different phase of your life, like her life for sure, but your lives as well. Totally. And it was such a clear passage. So she was 1 and I'm like, oh my God, like I just saw a year go by like that, snap of the finger. Whereas if you had asked me about like age 27 to 33, I was like, it kind of like was 6 years kind of like blended in together. I don't even know if it felt like 6 years. It definitely didn't feel longer than 6 years. It probably felt less than 6 years. I don't know. But I had no concept of those 6 years other than like my 30th birthday and my wedding, which were like kind of 2 milestones in that period. And so having a daughter, I'm like, wow, like I literally said to myself, if I stay in this job, I can see myself here in 20 years. And I can actually see it going by pretty fast. And it would have been financially, I wouldn't have a worry in the world. Status wise, people would be like, dude, damn, you got a good job. But that feeling of meh, like to the thought of that lasting for 1 more year, let alone 20 years, I was like, that's my greatest fear actually. And so people always ask me, they're like, you did something so risky. And I say, I actually think that the bigger risk would have been staying.
Right.
And let's unpack that statement of risk. So this goes to your second question, the second part of your question. The risk, what is the risk? Okay, so I have a high income, and first of all, I was lucky, and I'm touching wood, I had some savings. That pot of savings is much lower now, but I had them. And so, take my numbers oriented brain, create a budget, figure out roughly how much you spend each month, and see how long that sliver of your savings that you're willing to lose, like go to zero, how long that lasts you. And it's not scientific, but I estimated that period, it felt kind of in the 1.5 to 3 year range. And so that was one thing. And then the second thing, which was like much more basic, is I don't think I'll sound arrogant saying it's like, but if I went to become an entrepreneur and I failed, and I know most fail, right? I'm a numbers guy. 99% of startups fail. Pretty sure I could go back and get a job in the financial services industry. It might not be this exact job that I had before, and maybe it'd be like not as prestigious or, slightly worse quality of life, whatever. But I'm pretty sure I could get a job. And so then again, you think of the risk, so you risk that portion of savings that you're comfortable risking. You can get a job. It might not be like the exact same job you had, but you could definitely get a job. Or 20 more years of meh. Like the risk calculus was kind of a no-brainer at that point.
Right.
But here's one thing that's super interesting was that, and we can talk about the fear of money, because I'm convinced now that irrespective of your bank account, whether you have $100 in it or $1 billion, the feeling of watching it go down for the first time, if you've never experienced that, and I never had because I'd always been working, is one of the most terrifying feelings. And it's not related to the size, because it triggers this real deep sea, it launches us into our survivalist caveman brain, where it's like, oh, I'm at the risk of not surviving, as unrealistic as that may be. And so it took me a while to kind of acknowledge that risk piece that I just described. The second part was that it took me another year. This is what's so crazy. It took me another year to feel comfortable quitting. And in that year, I had to convince myself that it was okay to quit without having a plan. It took me a year to get the courage. I don't even know if courage is the right word, to convince myself that was acceptable. I could just see the shame where I would go to these people who respected me tremendously professionally, and I said, guys, I'm quitting and I have no plan. And they'd be like, you idiot. Like, at least have a plan. We think you're an idiot for quitting. We think you're a double idiot for quitting without a plan. But as you guys know, as entrepreneurs, what's that saying? The best plan never resists contact with the enemy. So that's couldn't be more true with entrepreneurs. Now I know that having a plan would have been probably a disadvantage.
So many places that I want to go with this.
That was really good.
To the point about the arrogance, I think we talk a lot about the faith and the belief that you can have your joy and your excitement, and that the universe is going to support you when you take a leap. And I can't even tell you. I mean, we're in exactly the same position. I just quit a job and was supporting us, and we're just here nodding along with you, Kay, because it's been a long journey for me as well. And the contrast of the joy with that I experienced with my daughter, and the coming in and working every day and grinding it out was so great that it moved me forward, but so there's so many places to go, but I want to hone in on, I know you've talked about this process of uncomfortable introspection that you've done, and you started out talking about this traces back to your childhood, and what I'm reading that to be, but it may be through the lens of my own identification, is that you developed these kind of survival strategies, or you focused on what your mind and what you were good at and what you could do, and you built up this safety system, your job and your bank account, and I guess the question is, what was that process like for you, sort of deconstructing that? And did that introspective process begin? You said it took a year to make the leap from your job. Did it begin before that or after that? What was that process of uncomfortable introspection like for you? And I know it continues, so maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that.
It began after, actually, and again, it is that the kind of the way the universe conspires in your favor when you put yourself out there. But in pragmatic terms, when I left, it was the first time I had nothing to do. And even for me, nothing to do was I learned how to meditate and started doing more yoga and reading philosophy and all that. But I think the biggest change was I got a coach. And the funny little life coach, business coach, or whatever you want, a therapist is what I call her. She's not MD, but it's funny. Just the story of the coach can help describe the state of mind that I was in. I got a coach because I had been working with a lot of startups as an advisor and an investor, and I kept seeing this recurring theme that some of the smartest and higher performing people that I met who were entrepreneurs all had coaches. And I was like, ooh, here's a little, this is like my little knack, system. And they're like, wait a minute, high performers have coaches. I need a coach.
Right.
And so I really approached even coaching through the lens of as you described, the system that had always worked for me. It was like, make me better at whatever I'm doing now. And I was going to change what I was doing, but it still was from that lens. I start working with a coach, and it doesn't take long to basically for her to be like, whoa, dude, you got some issues. And that I think that there's that narrative that, and I had a great middle class childhood, loving parents, private school, they paid for, textbook, great childhood. Even to the point, didn't lose family members at a young age, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's this, I believe this story that you don't, if you had a great childhood, you're not going to have issues. Your child, you can't complain about things that happen in your childhood that may have caused you distress as an adult. And what I mean by that is that like I was elaborating at the beginning, these small, they felt huge, right? When you think no girl will ever date you, that almost matters more than whatever grade you could. No, not it does matter more. Yeah. And so I think my coach really helped me go there. And what I realized was that I had never gone there, and these systems that I had built, they worked, but they were really me running from having to go there. And what is there, what I would quickly realize was there was just a lot of fear. And it was some of that survivalist fear. It was some of that experiential childhood fear. It was some fear, the more enlightened, the first world fears of being good enough and failure and what your peers think of you, right? The 1 year to quit. And I think that's when it really, my coach really kind of cracked me open there. And the way she describes it is she's usually I crack people open, they kind of sniff around a little and they learn about themselves and they're changed, and then they kind of go on. And she's like, I cracked you open and you just started shedding layer after layer after layer and just kept going and asking more questions. Why do I feel this way? Why did this happen? Why did this thought? And that's kind of the uncomfortable part. And the full part of the uncomfortable introspection is kind of like my Twitter bio, which is finding joy in uncomfortable introspection. And I love the kind of oxymoron nature of that. But the more I leaned into my fears, the more I publicized my insecurities, the more joy I was finding in life. And that was super counterintuitive.
Mm-hmm. One follow-up I wanted to ask you, in line with fear and discomfort is, I think many people that I personally know, you probably do too. I know Teresa and I have many friends who are in a position where they look around and they gather the same data that you gathered, which is time is flying by. My kids are growing right before my very eyes, and I barely spend any time with them. I have this job that brings in a lot of money, etc. This picture is not uncommon, and yet you made an uncommon choice. And I'm curious, looking back now a couple of years, there was something in there that compelled you in a different direction, something that nudged you in the direction of risk. And I'm curious if there was a catalyst, if you will. And it doesn't necessarily need to be something external, but is there something internal that you fell to in those moments that gave you whatever energy that is to leap you over the resistance, the fear, this notion of risk into a different path?
I think that there were, was a few things. The first was that those skills that I had cultivated, they gave me a lot of confidence that, whatever new challenge I would go upon, I'd be able to figure it out. So that was it. But that's at a very basic level. I think the other thing, and I don't think I've ever said this publicly. You just spurred this in me. Was that I had developed. I had a philosophy on relationships. And people would say that I'm the consummate networker, and everything about that makes me want to vomit. But I was very good in developing deep, meaningful relationships across a variety of different industries, across a variety of different age groups. And it was really simple. My approach was any relationship that I ever was a part of, I was singularly focused on ways in which I can make that person become a better person. And that really comes from my mom. My mom is very just caring, emotionally caring in that way, and very thoughtful and always thinking about other people, maternal. And that I had just spent so much time cultivating these relationships with people that I never thought about it explicitly, but I just knew that I had people who were rooting for me. And it just I didn't expect anything from them. In fact, I think one of my flaws is I feel too uncomfortable asking people for help. But I just that peace of mind that that people that the people really want to see you win and not even win, thrive, was something that was really empowering. And then lastly, I think it's more pragmatic. I think I realized pretty early in my life that having additional money, I didn't like to buy stuff. And so my income was going up, but my spending was definitely growing, but nowhere at the same rate. And so it's wow, especially in terms of material possessions, I have everything that I want. And so, yes, we love traveling. We love staying at nice hotels when we travel. We spend money on experiences. But there's something really liberating. My Wall Street peers, they'd get a bonus and then they'd go buy a $15,000 watch. They didn't even think about it. And I would be oh, I should get that watch too, right? That's what you do. But instead I would get a $20 watch or a $100 watch. So it's the watch, I don't care about watches. If they tell me the time, it's all that matters. And so that was empowering too, because I was okay, stuff doesn't make me happy. And I think I was able to very subtly detach from the expectation, right? I'm so proud that when I was on Wall Street, I drove a Ford Escape. My car, I mean, you guys lived in New York. My car payments are lower than my garage payments. And my friends, my peers were driving Land Rovers and X5s and all that. And 5% of them love cars and appreciate the beauty that is a Land Rover. The same way 5% are they're true watch connoisseurs, and knowing that this watch was made in Italy versus Switzerland, and this part's handmade, that actually brings them joy. They should spend the $13,000 on that watch or that car payment. But the other 95% look around and they're like, oh, but that guy has that watch. And I'm saying guys because it was all guys. That guy has that watch. Like, I should get that watch. And then maybe I'll feel the same as him, or maybe I'll be happier. And I was just lucky to never really get seduced by that. And that is a very, very empowering feeling when you go out and take the plunge.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what happened after you left. So I know you worked with a coach. So it's been 2 years, right? Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing. I know that you've been doing a lot of things. You mentioned meditating. I know you've journaled, traveled. How have you chosen to spend your time, and what has it done for you? Because I know you've been peeling the onion a bit too and arriving at more joy. So tell us a little bit more about that process.
There were two parts, and it really was the journey that I was on and the growth that I was going through. So when I left, recall that I thought I was missing intellectual satisfaction, and so I started down the path of building like a traditional venture-backed company, and all that entailed. And what I realized, I found myself back in, for your New York listeners, I was back on north of 42nd Street in Midtown, like where I call them energy vampires because they're just there to like suck the energy out of you. And I was there kind of like asking people for money for my new venture, putting on a suit that I didn't even want to be wearing. And I was like, what the heck am I doing? Like, but I had cracked myself open enough. I was like, I did not make these changes to do this. And that's when I realized, again, a part of like this uncomfortable introspection was the role of my ego, right? So I can, talk all proudly about not caring about material, watches and cars and all that, but I wanted people to say like, that guy knows what he's doing, or that guy's the real deal. And for me, that meant like doing something big in business. And so I started down that path, and I did not find joy. And thankfully I had been, awoken enough to be like, I'm out. So think about it as a false start. Think about it as another learning experience, but I was like, I'm out. And I had this really private moment with myself where I basically gave myself permission to not do anything related to business, which sounds like kind of trivial, but when you've staked your self-worth and identity and this like magical formula of like figuring business out, it's kind of like you're like naked, And so, but I had that conversation with myself. No one even knows about this. I've mentioned it a few times to people, but it's kind of a non-event to an outsider. And then this was January. So this was like 9 months into it. It was January of 16. Then I was just like, you know what? From now on, I'm just going to do things that make me happy. And when people hear that, they're like, what, did you like go to like bars and like smoke weed and watch Netflix? I'm like, no, like that actually doesn't bring me joy. And so, but these little things. So I had this little email newsletter, had 500 subscribers in January of 16, but I loved doing it. It brought me joy. The people who received it would, say what you did, like, it's exciting. I'm always kind of like, I look forward to it. I hear you in the email. And I was like, cool, I got this thing. I'm like, let me just make it better. And so, that's where I like redesigned it. And it's kind of like modern day craftsmanship where I did everything. Like I was on the phone figuring out my WordPress installation, which I'm sure you guys know.
Yep.
To like hiring designers on 99 Designs and like picking typography on MailChimp and setting up automation rules and all that stuff. So, but that was fun, you know, and there was no like business sense to what I was doing, but I was having fun. And what I thought was like, you know, I had probably like 1 year left on my like bank account, like savings that I had earmarked. So I was like, well, let's just see what happens in a year. I kind of thought I would just have this fun, do fun work, but in a year, like being an adult would catch up to me, and I'd have to like go get like a real with air quotes job. However, as I started to do that, then that's where, you know, you've mentioned it a few times, like the universe conspiring in your favor. That's when I was like, wait a minute. People were really resonating to what I was writing. And specifically, a big change was I had the email newsletter, but then I just started writing, blogging. And my blog, you know, was basically like, on the outside, it may look like my stuff's together. You know, I got it all. But on the inside, I'm just a scared little boy. And I think, you know, I think it's rare to hear males write in that voice, period. But it's super rare to hear like, you know, successful Wall Street males write in that voice. And the thing that kept me going was I was writing a lot about fear, like basically the things we've been talking about. And what really just like moved me was that pretty much every couple of days, someone would send me an email and say, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know why you're doing this, but whatever you're writing is connecting with a part of me that I didn't even like with things that I feel that I had never even put words on into. And I was like, holy crap, I wasn't trying to do that. I mean, honestly, for me, it was another way that I was like self-medicating. And people were saying that to me, and I'm like, oh my God, that is really powerful. But again, not only that, I'm like, it's like coming out of me. I'm not even like writing outlines, or it's just like the fingers are flying, you know? And so I started to do that, and it gave me a little bit of confidence to just kind of keep going. And what I realized was the more that I shared about myself, the more people resonated, which sounds obvious, but it's like a difficult thing to actually execute upon. And then a silly thing happened, which was, you know, my blog and my long form is very kind of like, it's like how a mid-30s guy audience would respond to. But then I just started to like be playful on social media, mostly Snapchat and then Twitter. And I just kind of started telling my stories in those new mediums. And guess what? Like, my peers don't use Snapchat. They still think it's an app for naughty behavior. But I knew that it's not an app. I mean, maybe there's naughty behavior that happens, but it really is like the number one way everyone under the age of 25 communicates, hands down. And I just kind of happened to stumble upon that from my curiosity. I love technology, so I was just trying out new stuff. And guess what? These 18-year-olds were like, wow, you're really connecting with me. You're saying the same thing. You're saying things that I've never even really fully verbalized in my own head. And so it just kept happening over and over again. And it was just awesome. It was fun. I was enjoying it. I was developing new friendships, right? It wasn't even like it wasn't that big, so I could communicate. I still can communicate with everyone pretty much on a one-to-one basis with a little bit of lag time. And from there, it was just kind of off to the races, where I just kept doing it. And I know that, in your podcast, you kind of like help people with these transitions. And the one thing that I cannot overemphasize is I was consistent. I had an idea and I would just do it consistently, whether it was writing a blog post, the email newsletter, 119 consecutive weeks. For 1 month, I wrote a blog post every weekday. Now my podcast, I'm trying to do 10 episodes every 2 weeks, over one episode every 2 weeks for 20 weeks. Mm-hmm. And with that consistency, you work your way into audiences' mind spaces, and not in a nefarious way. But B, you have accountability and you experiment. So a lot of the experiments didn't work. And I just moved on. And that leads to my second part of experimentation and consistency, is that you got to be ready for things to not work. And that's where that ego comes in. And the same part of me that was like, I need to be known for building big businesses, was like, you can't feel shame if you put something out there and no one responds to it. And so I think that combination of a consistent, I'm going to come up with a new term, consistent, egoless experimentation was what I am still adapting this formula as we speak. I'm writing a book proposal now. Nice. I write every day for 2 hours in airplane mode on my computer, every single day, even if I write 3 words. And so, there's a discipline to that. But if you care, and I think there is where it's like, we all got to make money too. I know that I can rely, and that's kind of, some of those like secret skills that I had, like that's them resurfacing in a place of abundance, not in a place of scarcity where they usually operated from.
And so the focus of Rad Reads, and by the way, from the West Coast, we thank you for naming it in a West Coast way.
Rad.
So you send out a weekly e-blast with a list of things that you found, I guess, interesting from the prior week. Is that, and that's the list, and then you blog, and now you're adding a podcast to that, and that is the scope of at least the business project as of now. Is that right?
Yeah, it's actually it's a little bit more than that. Mm-hmm. So there's the weekly email newsletter. That's kind of been the mainstay. The second thing is it's tiny, but it's a daily video blog on Snapchat every business day. And it's short. It's like 45 seconds. But it's 45 seconds around 9 a.m. every morning, every weekday. Mm-hmm. And I just I riff on one theme that I've been thinking about or writing about. And it's small in terms of the following, but it's a very, very fiercely loyal group of followers. And that reveals a very personal side of me because I'm just talking into a phone. Then there's the individual blogging, which has actually morphed a bit, where I'm an entrepreneur in residence at the media company, the digital media company Quartz. Mm-hmm. And so my blogging has kind of stopped for the most part. And now I'm a part-time journalist. So I write for Quartz, but again, around these same topics of knowing yourself, career reinvention, awakenings, the pursuit of happiness. Mm-hmm. The podcast is brand new. The book proposal is in the works. And there's 2 other pieces. There's, I call myself, I'm on the JV public speaking tour. So I don't have an agent, but through putting myself out there, people reach out and they're like, can we pay you to speak at our companies? And so I do that, which is a splotchy but nice source of income, but just really fun. It's like fun. It's hard. public speaking's hard, but I love the Q&A after. I usually end up speaking for 20 minutes and then lingering for 2 hours doing Q&A. And then I have a small, there's two other things. There's monthly community events in New York. So about 50 to 100 people gather each month, just like a group of I hate the N word. It's a friendly gathering of like-minded people.
Right.
Not that N word. I hate that one too. And then last, what was the last one? I do a tiny bit of coaching, executive coaching. Very small amount. I have like 2 or 3 clients.
Once again, there's so many things. I love what you were saying about the process unfolding. We talk on this podcast a lot about following your excitement, and it feels like when you were leaving your job, it was at that point maybe more about walking away from what didn't bring you joy. And it seems like in this process, you've started to, in this very beautiful way, interacting with the universe, follow your excitement to a place where it feels like abundance rather than scarcity. That's something we're really interested in. And I know that, Rad Reads, part of your mission, at least, is to help people become their best selves. And I'm curious about, it seems like that's a process you're involved in now, what that means to you and what you're trying to help others do when you say that.
Yeah, I think that the best way to describe it is, I think culturally, and I'll be a little general, but culturally, especially if you talk about kind of high achievement oriented folks, and there's a lot of those in this country, in the Western world, but even in like our smaller pockets, whether it's New York City or finance or technology, there's not the desire to look within is like frowned upon or not discussed or even tabooed. I think the taboo is going away a little bit, but there's also the patriarchal element of that. And so we're told, and then you look at layer like immigrant communities where it's like, even now, like my parents are like, you spend so much time asking these questions, it means you're bored, like go get a job. And so like the entire narrative around it, the branding even of it, like therapy or even life coaching, people feel like uncomfortable saying that word. And so what being your best self is changing the dialogue around looking within, around introspection. I put the word uncomfortable in it because, like anything worthwhile, there's got to be a little bit of struggle, not fear-based struggle, but you're not gonna get the physique that you want by just sitting around. And so what Rad Reads really is growing into is a venue, a space for the members of the community to dig into that journey and that journey of introspection. And one of my favorite, it's not even a quote, but ideas that someone once told me is so many people have the ability to see the beauty in others that person can't see in themselves. And so that's where the part of community comes in. And that's where, like I found a community by vulnerably sharing on my blog, and the readers through their interaction helped me work through some of my challenges. And so community brings that out, and you don't feel alone. I read old texts now, and I read these things like there's this passage from the Tao Te Ching where it's fill your bowl to the brim and it will spill. Keep sharpening your knife and it will dull. chase after money and security, and your heart will never unclench. Care about other people's approval, and you'll always be their prisoner. Mm. And I read that, and I'm like, holy moly. Like, that's me. That was me in finance, literally, like to the T. If you summarize me in 8 sentences, that was me. But guess what? That was written 2,500 years ago in a completely different language. So when you realize, and again, this is like, I think, I say branding because I still think like a business person. But when you realize that this isn't a Wall Street thing, this isn't a millennials thing, this isn't an iPhone thing, this isn't a religion thing. This is the human condition. And just seeing that someone else was struggling with the exact same thing to the T that I was struggling with 2,500 years ago made me feel less alone. And so the analogy I love to give is imagine that you're a physical couch potato, meaning you love to eat Doritos and watch Netflix. And you're not healthy. You're not physically healthy. If that person just walked for 20 minutes a day, their chance of heart disease and lots of bad things happen would plummet. And a 20-minute walk is, for the most part, like socioeconomic, agnostic, pretty much accessible to everyone. And you don't really need to learn anything to do it. I see in my peer group, I saw it in myself, I was the biggest emotional couch potato ever. And what I realized was that equivalent of the 20-minute walk, it's not one thing. And it's very personal, but you guys know it. It's a combination of spending your time reflecting, journaling, a meditation practice, nutrition, sharing vulnerably with peers, finding meaningful work, traveling, giving back to communities, reading the ancient texts, like. All those things are, in my mind, accessible in the way a 20-minute walk is. And really, if you ask me what my mission is to share that message and those tools. And I think that's where the community part comes in, is because like my tools, there's probably overlap between my tools and your tools, but they're different. They're going to be different. And if we could just create a space where we can talk about that, where we're not judged for talking about that, where people understand shifting scarcity from money. Like I still say that to people and they look at me like I have 4 heads and that I like just got back from an ayahuasca retreat. And when I really say is like, okay, you want an example of abundance? I decided one day to ask people to donate to my blog. I didn't give them anything extra. Capitalism dictates that I should get 0. And I got $12,000. That is a capitalist definition of abundance.
Right.
It breaks the conventional thinking. And you guys know this because you're living it. You see that everywhere. And if we can share that with people, and you guys are doing that beautiful work through this podcast and through all your other endeavors, then we empower others to just see it. And I really believe that, I mean, the world needs more. I think from introspection comes compassion, self-compassion, compassion towards others. God, does the world need that right now, more so than ever.
Well, Kay, you've that answer opened up a lot of other possible follow-up questions, but I think what we'll do is we tend to wrap up our conversations by asking all of our guests some fairly similar questions to kind of create a nice through line, if you will, throughout our podcast series. Yeah, I'm still. I want to bite on the bait of some of the things you just said. I will very quickly. I think
Go for it.
One thing that I would love to hear about is in terms of your meditation practice, and I know that you were invested in that fairly heavily when you made your change 2 years ago, and I'm wondering what kind of routine or practice you may engage with now, and when. Is that in the morning, or kind of what shape or what relationship do you have to that?
Yep, it's a key part of my day. But so I wake up every morning at 5:15. I meditate immediately, TM, 20 minutes, transcendental meditation for those who are unfamiliar. I then go work out, usually a mix of CrossFit or just like doing some calisthenics at home. And then I spend 2 hours in the mad rush to get the Soraya fed, bathed, brushed, clothed, all of that stuff. And then I drop her off at school, and so that is kind of like my morning practice, and I really protect that in a very sacred way. And of course that let's talk about the bookends of the day. That really hits on the end of your day, because if you're waking up at 5:15, you got to go to bed by at least. I mean, I try to go to bed by 9:45, but really it's like 10:15. And I'd love to add an hour of sleep somewhere, but it's just not happening for me right now. But so then throughout the day, then a few things that really are part of this like mental practice. As an entrepreneur, I have more control about communication style. I only check my email 3 times a day. I check my email at 7 a.m., 1 p.m., and 5 p.m. And there's ways like in this, like when we're communicating, I have ways to pull messages out, or like for logistics. But in terms of the onslaught of communication, none of it. I have no social media apps on my phone except for Snapchat, which I justified in myself as being part of my business. And I have a 7-minute cap on Twitter on my desktop, which is the only place that I can access it. And I actually don't know my Twitter password. My wife knows it, so that I can't like cheat and log on to my phone, because I actually don't know the password. It's just remembered into my laptop. And so like I have a bunch of different things like that. And then I do a second meditation. I try to do it in the afternoon, but really it just happens like right before bed. And I try to read like 10 to 15 pages of a physical book every day. And I try to like stretch, like light yoga, like 5 to 15 minutes a day. So those are kind of like my anchor practices.
That's so wonderful. And I'm just sitting here nodding about the way you've protected your practice as sacred with these practices on the computer and your phone, because when you were talking about how everything's a struggle to grow and to get to progress. I can't remember exactly how you put it. This is so important, this protecting our practice and our growth and our connection with that stream of abundance through this kind of vigilance and protection. We're just nodding here because we've been talking about a lot of the same types of practices for ourselves, and really, not diverting off the path with the suck into Facebook for an hour, which is just so easy and so common today. So anyway, that was so great to hear that.
and also just the identification of the wake up time, at least in my case, our case, being determined by our daughter's wake up time. And so I know, like, if I'm going to get my morning practice in, I've got to get up about an hour before she does. And she keeps getting up earlier and earlier and earlier. So.
And we'll wait until daylight savings, man. Then it really starts to mess you up.
Well, okay, I know that we have to wrap up, so we'll do our final questions. So the first is, what book or books up to 3 would you recommend that every human being should read?
Tao Te Ching, Stephen Mitchell translation. Um, I wouldn't say they have to read it, but I love, it's called Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. It's a Quaker philosopher. And let's see, what book do I really like? I'm going to throw a curveball in. There's a book called The Billionaire Who Wasn't. It's about a man named Chuck Feeney, who was the founder of duty-free stores. He's actually the one who pioneered this concept that like Zuckerberg and Warren Buffett are doing now of like giving all their money away while living. But he did it in a way that he tried excruciatingly hard to make all of his donations completely anonymous.
Oh, wow.
Until some investigative journalist was like, wait a minute, someone just gave $50 million to Cornell and didn't want his name on the building. Like, I need to find out who this person was. So eventually he got exposed. He's still alive, actually. He's in his 80s.
Wow, that's cool. I think somebody else has mentioned that book too, to us. Double reminder there. What item or thing have you held on to the longest, and why?
Wow. Let's see. That's a difficult one. It probably would be either like some pictures, some like physical photographs of kind of the frames that travel like irrespective of where you live. And so there's this one picture of my sister and I when we're both like wearing our college paraphernalia, so like a Yale shirt, and she's got a BC shirt. And there's this other family picture of me, my parents, and my sister and I on vacation. And then there's this one picture of Lisa and I from when we met way before we were married or anything like that. It was actually like when you go to a party and there's like a photographer. So I think it's like sponsored by like Jose Cuervo. So it was like the little Jose Cuervo emblem in like the bottom right corner. So I would probably say that's no comment on how we were feeling that night.
Right.
Oh, great. The last question. What have you learned in the last 30 days that you think every person should know?
Ooh, I have one. I just started. I'm lucky that I live in the same city as my parents. I just started. I've always known about this, but they're called positive rituals. Or actually, it's even more basic. Anytime there's a person who I really care about, every time I see that person, we don't separate until we have put our next hangout on our calendars, like while we're standing with each other. And it's only for a small group of people. Obviously, you can't do that for everyone. But it forces you to figure out who that group of people are. And you just realize that, it's a simple act of intentionality. It really cuts through all of the friction of like emailing to pick dates. And it forces you to prioritize what's important. And I think that I've done that with my parents individually and a couple of friends. And it's just been awesome because I see them more, and there's never that really frustrating part of like of scheduling something.
Yeah, that's very cool. Well, I know we're out of time, and thank you for being so generous with your time, Kay. Before we let you go, give listeners just a sense of where they can connect with you online, what you'd like people to know about, maybe what's coming up for you, et cetera.
Great. Thank you for that, and thank you for the honor of being on the show. I think we could have talked for 4, 5, 6 hours, and we will at some point. I would say that kind of where all the magic begins is at radreads, radreads.co. Where I think, like I said earlier, the main kind of touch point for now is the email newsletter. So there's a subscribe link up in the corner. I love Snapchat. Radreads is my handle on Snapchat. Every day there's a story. A lot of people ask questions, and I answer questions to the community on Snapchat. Podcast is starting to gather momentum, and so that will be also on the blog. And I'm pretty active on Twitter in those 7 minutes that I'm allowed to be on it. And my screen name is my full name, which is KHEMARIDH.
Cool.
Awesome.
Well, Kay, thanks so much for your time and your wonderful insight. I know a lot of people will benefit from your wisdom and from your time sharing with us today.
Yeah, very inspiring and so accessible and relatable too. So you really are giving a gift. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you guys so much. It's been a pleasure.
All right, that's it for this week's Ownstream podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed our interview with Kay High. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode for links to everything mentioned, including the Radreads website, the CNN article, his TED Talk, social media channels, and so much more. All of that can be found at ownstream.co/Khay. That's ownstream.co/KHEHY.
Also, before we let you go, please sign up for our weekly tip-off email at ownstream.co and just click the sign up button in the upper right-hand corner. This is where we share each Monday 3 cool things we've learned in the last week in the areas of lifestyle, business, and spirit. This could be an amazing quote, individual, tip, or tool designed to bring you more freedom and power in your life. So definitely sign up for that, again, at ownstream.co, and just click sign up.
Finally, we recently started our Facebook page. We'd love it if you liked us at facebook.com/Ownstream and be the first to know about new podcast episodes, new blog content, and cool stuff related to our personal journey, including our van conversion. Also, we're on Twitter at Ownstream and on Instagram, where we post regularly at own_stream. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Ownstream podcast. To learn more and connect with us, please visit ownstream.co or follow us on Twitter at Ownstream and Instagram at own_stream.